Hi everyone, welcome back to rodTV. I'm Rod and it's episode 2. Firstly, I want to say thank you so much for your amazing response to episode 1 last week. So many people have emailed me about it, have been talking and posting about it, and I think we are really going to have a lot of fun together on this YouTube channel of mine. And I just want to remind you that it is a YouTube channel. This isn't real TV, and I don't have great big studios and equipment and all of those things behind me. It's really just me and my phone. So if you're not having enough volume, you're going to need to turn up the volume. I don't have equipment. There's no gain on a phone that can make it sound louder. Some of the technical is affected by upload issues with our South African internet, sometimes requiring me to scale things down, which can affect quality. So just bear with me, enjoy it with me. It's kind of a low budget affair with me and my phone and my MacBook, and that's how this is happening. It's kind of more real, I've done a lot of real TV, and there's nothing real about it at all. I had a TV show for 9 years where I used to do monthly horoscopes. And there, just as much as even on my little YouTube TV, things are not what they look like. So for me, part of how I have to control things, if I move this phone 1 pixel in the wrong direction, you're going to see too much of a background that I don't want you to see. And I'd much rather be doing this outside in the garden, but Cape Town, the wind, there's nothing I can do about that. Even on real TV, once we shot a series at a Durbanville wine farm. It had the most magnificent location and the most magnificent view of Cape Town in the background, and that's where we were shooting the monthly horoscopes that year. Except being Cape Town, it was extremely windy. And so a lot of that shoot was I would say a few words, and then the sound engineer would say, hang on a second, I can hear the wind in the tree. There was a tree out of camera next to me. And so she'd tape up 1 or 2 of the branches. And eventually, after a couple of hours, this entire tree was wrapped in masking tape and plastic and literally like, oh, plumped down to the road like a wild animal that's been trapped. And there I sat in my radio voice, that SABC voice that we have on TV and radio, talking calmly as if there wasn't a strangulated tree and a Cape Town wind happening around me. That's real TV. Here on YouTube TV, you are going to sometimes hear the wind. You're sometimes going to get an angle or a technical matter you don't like. And you're sometimes going to see Penny. Did any of you spot Penny last week? She was there, and sometimes other unexpected guests, and sometimes even some expected guests might arrive. So enjoy the ride with me. We want to talk about a little bit more like real astrology today. Last week, we spoke about looking at the future for South Africa, one of the important functions of astrology. But what most people who are at least lay people think astrology is, or how they're exposed to astrology, is through the popular press. I mean, most people think of astrology as meaning your sun sign. You're an Aries or a Taurus or a Gemini, and you talk about characteristics associated with that and so on. And it's also true that most people relate to a lot of those characteristics, 40 or 50% of them easily for most people, which is a little bit remarkable, especially considering the fact that sun signs have very little to do with what astrology ever really was, and they are a comparatively recent invention. I mean, there's always been a sun, and there have always been signs of the zodiac, and really the ancient people developed the use of the signs of the zodiac to be able to say where the planets are as they move through those signs of the zodiac. We can say, well, oh, look over there, it's in Capricorn, and over there it's in Aquarius, and it moves very slowly through all those signs. In the case of the sun, it takes a month for the sun to move through one of those signs. And the controversies about those signs, which exist, we're going to talk about in another show, probably next week. But the idea that the sun in that sign represented your personality in some way is completely foreign to astrology right up until the 20th century. For something that began in the first millennium, really, BC, and was in the form that we know it in the early hundreds BC. Over 2,000 years go by before anyone thinks of sun signs. Where did that come from? Of course, that isn't astrology. And sun signs was a development out of two things that happened in the early part of the 20th century. One of them was a decision in the 1920s by a British newspaper to use an astrological analysis of a member of the royal family in order to editorialize about what was going on in the royal family. And that caught fire instantly. People were fascinated by that, and very soon a couple of newspapers in England were in fact publishing astrological charts about members of the royal family and others, and it was extremely popular. So much so that historians say now that while they might have innovated this idea of putting astrology into the press, judging by the reaction, kind of people always were waiting for something like that. There was something else going on in the early 20th century since the very end of the previous century, and that was the development of the kind of self-knowledge, self-help, we would call it, movement and form of psychology and spirituality that arose at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century. So by the time you reach the 1930s, the idea of you are responsible for developing yourself, for enlightening yourself, you can be a better person, and the importance of the self as responsible for the journey, something that developed in the early part of the 20th century. Before that, where people were relying on gods or signs or nature or a bigger idea of the soul, throughout history, different things. But the one that we're so familiar with, it's kind of all about me, well, that comes from the early 20th century. And in the early 1930s, astrologers, probably one astrologer, came up with the idea of talking about astrology in the context of the sun. Why the sun? Is because it represents the kind of identity part of ourselves. To an astrologer, that's a very small part of ourselves. It's by no means the whole picture. There's all sorts of things. We would talk about the rational things and the emotional things separately from the identity and so many other things. But the identity is in the sun. So these astrologers developed the idea that the sun can be used to discuss and analyze the identity, especially since the new identity in the early 20th century was, it's all about me. And that caught fire in the newspapers. By the middle 1930s, sun sign astrology was everywhere, and it was a brand new invention. So just so that you know, sun sign astrology is less than 100 years old. It's not astrology as we know it as astrologers, as it's always been. It lacks the not only accuracy of regular astrology, but it lacks anything personal. Regular astrology is based on your birthday and your place that you're born and the time that you're born and all of those kind of things. And this is a generalization that supposedly applies to millions of people all at the same time. That's the common criticism that's often levied at sun sign astrology, is that how could everything be happening the same to all the Capricorns, all the Aquarians, whatever in the world? Surely you can't divide the world up into 12 and then say all 1/12 have similar experiences. Of course, that's nonsense. But what was important to those 1930s astrologers was giving people a tool, while being a general tool, could still be used personally to understand something about yourself and to make use of that information about yourself. And that was revolutionary. And as general as sun signs are, and as perhaps as kind of meaningless or 50% meaningless that they are, it's revolutionary that they are this generalized tool that can authentically give at least some insight into the personal journey. Even from then on, astrologers themselves were very torn about it, and astrologers were saying it's diminishing astrology and popularizing it and making it look like nonsense because that isn't real astrology. But there are many other astrologers who said it helps keep astrology in the public eye. I mean, the fact is that here in the 21st century, and even most of the 20th century, people can talk about their sun sign. People who know nothing about astrology can say, I'm an Aries, and then what they really mean is the sun was in Aries when I was born. And prior to the 20th century, very, very few lay people would have any access to direct knowledge about astrology or any sign of the zodiac or anything like that. So some astrologers say it's done astrology a lot of good. The other thing, and this is a view that I take, is that astrology is a very human art and science. It is a very human way of understanding the cosmos and relating it to ourselves. It is really like it's a model of the cosmos seen through our own eyes. Newton had a model of the cosmos that looked at it according to various mechanical laws, and Einstein had a model of the cosmos that included things like the speed of light and so on. And all of these are models of the cosmos, this greater world, universe that we know. Well, the astrologers' cosmos from the earliest days included the human being at the center. So astrology is very much a human art science. And so, because it is that, it doesn't belong to the professionals any more than science belongs to the scientists or art belongs to the artists. These are all human things done by human beings, and they kind of belong to us all. And while certainly at the level of offering it as a professional service, that's going to require training. You can't say that just belongs any more than any other professional service. But the fact is that astrology is an integral part of human culture. It's in our art, it's in our science, it's in our religion, it's in the way that we've conceived of the world for over 2,000 years, probably very much longer than that. The sky belongs to everyone, and the human experience belongs to everyone. So, my particular take is that while real astrology, the astrology of your date and place and time of birth, your personal astrological chart that's a map of the sky at the very moment that you were born, that is the real meaning of astrology, and that gives the astrologer the power to make personal comments, personal predictions, and so on, in a way that sun signs could never do. In fact, they were never intended to be used for predictions at all. They were meant to be a form of self-development. So while it does require an actual astrologer to do that side of it for you, the fact is that it's also part of popular culture because it's part of the human experience. And I think the more astrology that's everywhere, the better it is for all of us and for astrology. So then, having said all of that, what can I say about your sun sign then for this year? Can I say something? Well, like I just told you, sun signs were never about prediction. Sun signs were always a way of trying to understand the individual. And in fact, astrologers, as is evident in that idea of sun signs, are very much more concerned with planets and objects in the sky, like the sun and the moon and the other planets, than signs of the zodiac, which are really imaginary constructs, mostly helping us to see where everything is in the sky. Again, the discussion of the signs will come at some other time, but the bottom line is it's really planets that we care about. When there are planets in your sign, we've got something really interesting to say. And when people do sun sign columns, they're looking at the planets in the various signs at that time and where these things are appearing in the sky, and that helps them make some predictions. But in reality, it isn't a predictive form of astrology. There are things we can do with it. And realistically, that's much more on a month by month basis. After all, if the sun is changing signs every month, it's like the signs are a monthly calendar. And indeed, they are. That's one of their most important functions. And so when it comes to the months, we can do sun sign astrology, as you know it in the newspaper, much more successfully than trying to talk about your sign of the zodiac for the year ahead. Okay, talk, even on TV, I was in the narrow box of this is how that astrology is done, and I didn't have very much room to reinvent it or do it in any other kind of way. Not that it needs reinvention, but to do it in a way that perhaps is a little bit more useful to you. How can we make it more useful to you, especially when we talk about the year? Well, when we talk about the year to the astrologer, I'm thinking about what are the cycles of the planets this year? I told you about that last week. Where are those cycles with respect to the signs? Because then it can start affecting you. And it still is relevant to the sun signs because, I said the sun is about the self and it's about the journey of the self. And before we had the modern terminology and ideas of self-development and self-enlightenment and so on, the soul was what the sun represented. The soul, in a very much broader sense than we tend to understand that word religiously, a kind of an essence of the person at a spiritual level, not at an identity level. In fact, it seems like by the end of the 19th century, we'd lost our connection with spirit. The religion had declined completely. The materialism um, and material science had risen to the point where by the 20th century, the human culture anyway was to believe that human beings are at the center of their cosmos. So the soul planet became the I ego planet, the sun. But to an astrologer, whether you're calling it the soul or the ego or the identity, the sun represents as well the journey of that essence, that individual through time. And we use the sun in predictive astrology to have a look at the unfolding of the journey of the individual. So that's also why it still remains relevant to talk about it in terms of sun signs. But what I want to do about that is not just talk about Aries are going to do this and Taurus are going to do that, but I'm actually going to come from that planetary point of view. And so when we talk about the planets, anything a planet doesn't only affect the sign that it's sitting in, but it also affects other signs. And for the purposes of our yearly analysis at a general level, we can group the signs into three groups of four. Four signs are always affected at the same time whenever one of the planets is busy with one of its cycles. And it's really just because of the mathematical nature of cycles that you can see in the seasons, really. The cycle of the sun has four major changes in it, and that's the four seasons, of course, and that produces four great big changes on the earth without fail, according to the movement of the sun and the position of where you are on the earth. So we're going to use that same concept of how the planets affect the changes in fours. And that means that I'm not going to go on that month by month basis that we know from the newspapers and the radio and so on, but I'm going to use my groups of four and talk to you all in general. So let's start talking about the first group, which are Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn. Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn are the signs of the zodiac that are found at the 4 points of the compass and are the ones that are at the solstices and the equinoxes. So they will always experience some changes together. And many of the changes I'm talking about for 2016 mostly affect those born around the 5th of the month to the 8th of the month in those signs. So if it's Aries, it means I'm talking about April, and if it's Cancer, it means I'm talking about July, Libra, I'm talking about October, Capricorn, I'm talking about January. So born between the 5th to the 8th of the month, experiencing major changes. Might have already been experiencing some of them from the last year already, depending on when that 5th to the 8th that you were born. And these are rather challenging changes. It's kind of pressure to change things and to accept and deal with things that are not in your control. Very much about things that are not in your control, the influence of fate and places where you don't have very much power in your own life. These are going to be put on the table in front of you, and you're going to have to find ways of doing something about it without having a chance to gain power. So what that really means is it's a time to build some foundations. You have to look at what do I need to change, and really where do I need to let go because I'm not in control? What do I need to even let go of because I'm not in control? I accept that I'm not in control because that ain't going to happen. So where can I also build some foundations in order for change to happen? Some of you in the group, especially the Aries and Librans, born between the 7th and the 14th of their months, that of course is April or October, are really having some big changes this year. Also a little bit, we saw that last year. And here's looking at you, number one, born also in that time. And those changes are also about I've got to let go and do something completely new or in a new way. I have to be willing to innovate and step out of the box. Otherwise, it's going to be frustrating and difficult. But for everyone, things do begin to look up from September, especially those born between the 23rd of the month through to the 11th of the next month. That's most people in that group. Things will definitely start to improve. The next group are Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. They're called the fixed signs in astrology, and in ancient times, people understood those signs to be at the corners, not at the compass points, but at the corners of the cosmos. They are the things that hold up the cosmos. You'll see it in ancient depictions, and look out for it in art. Taurus, the bull, Leo, the lion, Aquarius, the man, and Scorpio, depicted usually as the eagle, usually at the four corners of a painting or some depiction of the cosmos or of the world. And that's the four anchors. That's why those are the stubborn, fixed, and solid signs. And I have to say, things are going to be easier for you lot than they have been for years. You've had a good few years of real challenge, of difficulties and restrictions of every kind. And now the weight is off your shoulders. And isn't human nature a funny thing? That means there could be a bit of complacency, boredom, stagnation. For some, it just means time flies. And the next thing you know, it's 2017 because nothing major is going on. But for most of us, it means, well, you can actually enjoy being a little bit off the hook and not complaining. It's like when nothing is going on, it's like, I really need something to happen. And when all of this is happening, is that I just need some peace and quiet. And that's human nature. So, Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, Aquarius, some peace and quiet for you. You've been let off the hook for most of the major stuff coming up this year. It doesn't mean nothing's going on, and on a month-to-month basis in the future on this show, we might hear more about it. But for now, take a breather. Can't say the same for the last bunch, which is Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces, where there is a lot of action. Firstly, while on the subject of Geminis, those born around the 4th of June, there's an eclipse in that position this year, and that can make it a little bit of a harder push, but you could also be setting yourself up for something great. There's a lot of stuff going on in your signs, and especially in Gemini, that suggests that there's kind of some kind of foundation being set for something in the future. But this is the bunch of signs, we call them the changeable signs or the mutable signs, that slip and slide and avoid their responsibilities sometimes more than they should, and don't like to knuckle down too much. So you're going to need to knuckle down for Geminis particularly, and funny enough also if Geminis particularly find that hard to do, but that's how the universe tends to work for us. And I don't really mean the universe, I mean the stars and the planets when I say that. It's also a time for this group of signs to be aware of overindulgence, overdoing things. Your judgment is a little impaired, especially though those who need their heads out of the way, the more artistic, the more who need to act on their passions. This is going to be a good time for you. It's time to kind of put the rational aside a little bit and go with your heart, follow the dream, and kind of allow something bigger to move you rather than your own rational needs. And setting up for the future, time of foundations for your sign as well. And sometimes that means about accepting realities. In fact, as I said last week, there's an overall theme this year for all of us about appearance versus reality. And I said it last week, and if you didn't hear it, the great thing about this, rather than real TV, is just go back and listen. And you can watch that show and hear me talking about the lesson of appearance versus reality. So that faces this changeable group a lot. Born around the 26th or the 27th of the month in Gemini, Virgo, Pisces, and Sagittarius, might have to face a little bit of letting go, some loss or disillusionment, feelings of vagueness, kind of everything's just blah, nothing's really happening, feeling disillusioned. Very common for people born in the late part of the month if you're in those signs. And things will eventually clear, but it's a big lesson in patience. It really is. So you've got to sit tight, be patient, look within, and ask yourself, what illusions can I let go of? What is not real? It isn't supporting me any longer. I need to face reality about certain things. Facing reality about certain things now is going to be the best thing you can do for yourself, because as time unfolds, and especially by next year, you're really going to see that you laid some new foundations by letting go of what was not relevant. I mean, if you're going to start something new, weed as you go, identify what's not working for you, cut it out as you go, face reality, follow the dream, but face reality. And by 2017, everything is much more real and much better. And now for some Astrology 101, where we get to look at some of your questions about the actual mechanics of astrology, but from a layperson's point of view. Because, I mean, here's a great question from Charles. Why are astrologers so concerned about time and place of your birth? Why is that so important to astrology? And it is. So here's why. So I said earlier on that we say where the sun and the other planets are by saying what sign of the zodiac they're in. So if I'm looking at the sun today, I can see it there in the sign Aquarius, where it will stay for a month. And the zodiac is used to identify the position of the sun or the other planets in the starry sphere itself. But the sky around me is changing much more quickly than that. It changes with the spin of the earth. When I'm looking at that sun in Aquarius at 2 p.m., I'm looking up and to my right. But it's in a different position at different times of the day. Look on the right side of the screen. If it were 6 o'clock in the morning and I was looking at the sun, I would be looking down to my left. I'd be seeing it just above the earth. Rising in the east. It's still Aquarius, but the whole sky appears to spin through the course of the day. Of course, it's the earth spinning. The whole sky is actually spinning every single day. And so at 6 o'clock in the morning, I'll see the sun in one position. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it's in a completely different position. These positions in the sky, which we call houses, are very important in astrology. Similarly, if I consider being in a different place on the earth, there I am in Cape Town looking at Aquarius, as I said, the sun at that particular time of the day. At that very moment, there might be someone in India looking at the sun who is seeing it just above the horizon towards the west, while I'm still seeing it above and to the right above me. So at the very same moment in time, someone in a different position on the planet is seeing it in a different house of the sky. If I had someone in America over there looking at that sun, they would be seeing it on the horizon, and that for them would be the eastern horizon. The guy in India is seeing it on the western horizon. But all of us are looking at the sun at exactly the same time. I've just put it again on the right for you there. If I put America at the top, just to show you he's seeing it on the eastern horizon, just to make it easier to see that. But the point is that we're all looking at the sun at the same time and seeing it in a different position of the sky because we're in a different place on Earth. So both the time of the birth and the place of the Earth directly affect where in the sky we see these planets in their zodiac, and the time and place therefore localize the information to you personally. That's why that's so important, and that's what makes astrology so accurate and makes all the difference. Astrology 101. Thanks, Charles, for that great question. And if you have questions for Astrology 101, send them along with all your other questions as well. But now it's time for your questions about you, questions from your own chart. As usual, a quick question gets you a quick answer. So Sandy had a question. Sandy writes and says, will my business make the money it needs by the end of March this year? Sandy, it doesn't look like financial circumstances are dramatically increasing on their own in these couple of months, so that might get a little anxious. But what the chart does suggest is that there is a friend who can help you or make something easier for you. So it's kind of like it's saying this is the time to reach out a little bit and maybe not exactly meet your goals, but do what you need to do to sustain your business so that you can lead to greater income, perhaps just a little bit further on than the end of March. So hang tight there, reach out, and everything's working for you. Artemis says, will I be moving suburb or town in the near future? It doesn't look that near, not for a little while. Judith writes and says, In the last year or more, meaningful, close, long term friends and family have had fights with me, leading to a parting of the ways. Heartbreak and feelings of being an outsider ensued. What does this mean? Is there anything in the stars that will indicate this is a phenomenon of some kind rather than a personal thing? And that's an important question because it often seems to us that things are happening to everyone around us as well as ourselves. Well, there are such things. Those are the great big planetary cycles that I mentioned last week. But we usually perceive things as similar in the people around us because we have certain automatic filters. Most of the people around us are age mates or within a few years of our own age, meaning they'll experience major cycles at similar times. Or they're people that, for other reasons, are similar to us. We self select with friendship, with so on. The people that we're drawn to, the people that we draw to us, a lot of those are more similar than a random person would be. And so they may have other similar things going on in their charts. So there is that reason there as well. But Judith, in your case, I looked at your chart and I'm afraid it is your chart. It's not a general thing. Even though you're seeing it in other people around you, it is being caused by one of the major slow cycles, but in a personal position in your chart. Your birth time is not perfect. We know it's only a little bit approximate, so I can't time it very well in your chart, but I can see that it's been there for a while and probably has still a while to go, at least the rest of this year into next year, this seemingly random departures. There's also, we can't control people. And sometimes, as much as we might want the relationship or want things to work in a particular way, people have their own stuff and they leave or they change, they go. And this is the time to accept with grace, clean out the friendship field, let it happen all on its own. You're not in control, and that's a good thing. Robert, your question next week. It fits the show next week. And we'll be here next week in that show talking about, with all this prediction and going to astrologers, can you even change the future? And many other things to talk about too. So see you right here next week. Don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel. It's free. And send your questions, whether it's about your chart, about Astrology 101, or anything else you like. And we'll be back same time next week. See you then.